Welcome to the Bias Buzz Special Edition. My guest today is author and writer Cheryl Chumley. Her new book is called The Devil in D.C., Winning Back the Country from the Beast in Washington. And for those who are actually watching, I'll hold it up. So, Cheryl, why don't you just give me a brief overview about this book? It's a very interesting title.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, first off, Don. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in.
The Devil in D.C. is basically a step-by-step guide for Christians in particular, but other patriotic Americans, how to take back the government and put it under God's control. You hear in the Christian camps particularly, we need to put the government back, we need to put God back in charge of our country. We need to put God over our government. But what does that mean on a pragmatic day-to-day basis? And in Devil in D.C., each chapter is a recommendation, a suggestion that patriots and Christians can take to do just that.
All right, so let's start here with the election, because, there's a lot of politics, obviously, in this book and kind of as this guideline. What is your take about this election at this point? We've had the Republican convention. We're almost done with the Democratic convention. Where are we going? What are your thoughts, just really in general, about the candidates, the parties, things like that?
Well, I actually think that Trump basically. His rise to the forefront is because America is so tired of the status quo. They're sick of being betrayed by their politicians. And I look at that because, we're not following God's path for our country, so we're always putting our trust in politicians. And when we do that, we're just doomed to be disappointed because they're politicians. And even if they're honest when they go to Capitol Hill, things happen, and even the honest voices are just one voice in the wilderness. So Trump came to the forefront, I think, based on immigration and national security. It was when Kate Steinle was just murdered on the pier in California, and he was the one that was coming out and speaking strongly about radical Islamism, something that our existing president doesn't even want to put together in one phrase. So I think that's where he's come from, where his strength is. And no matter what the polls, no matter what the mainstream media put forth, Trump is a candidate that has brought together Americans on that core issue. Evangelicals have had some difficulty embracing him because of his flip-flops, his differences of opinions over abortion over the years, and other matters. But I genuinely think that Mike Pence coming aboard now is going to rally a lot of the Christian base behind him.
Right. I think that's a good point there, is that the Pence was a good selection to try to solidify the conservatives. This has been a big problem for Trump, at least if you read the media, if you want to believe the media, all the never Trumps and things like that they weren't not comfortable with Trump because of his positions. He had flip-flopped, as you said, many times. He doesn't have a conservative track record. He doesn't have a Christian track record, really, of any kind that anybody can really point to definitively. Pence kind of fits that mold. He kind of helps bring in that base. But I agree with you. The evangelicals, he had the big meeting with them. But I think even after he had that big meeting in New York, it was still kind of hard for them. We've been seeing slowly but surely some of them coming on. I don't know whether the evangelical leaders, and maybe you have a better insight to this, that if they go and endorse Trump, will that sway their followers? Will that sway the masses enough to go and vote? Because you look back at 2012, Mitt Romney being a Mormon seemed to have an effect on evangelicals and others who said, I can't vote for a Mormon, I'm going to stay home, and we know what happened. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's no candidate that's perfect. If you're a Christian and you're looking for that perfect candidate who's going to meet your checklist of, Christian views and Christian viewpoints, you're not going to find one because everybody's just human. So what you have to do is the rest of us humans, and you have to pick from the best. And right now you have Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And Gary Johnson, I guess, as you mentioned, but I don't know.
Jill Stein.
Right. So let's just say it's Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And out of those two, which are the best? Which are the best that least offend your Christian principles? And when I look at Trump, I'm a Christian. When I look at Trump, I see a man who has many problems, I guess, just like any other human. But I have core issues that are national security, jobs, and the war on terror. And on those three issues, I think that he's the stronger candidate. If abortion was my top issue, then I wouldn't like either candidate. But you have to be pragmatic as a Christian, too. You're supposed to live in this world, not of this world, but you still live in this world, and you have to deal with what you're handed.
Right. I mean, those are the politicians as such that we've been given. I don't know if I want to call Trump necessarily a politician at this stage, but he has definitely struck a chord and a nerve. I mean, I'm going to be very curious in the fall as to how many people actually wind up voting for it. Will he pull enough people over that are, will we have this kind of a Trump Democrat like we did with Reagan Democrats? Will he be able to kind of solidify and take those votes away from Clinton? Because she struggles with a lot of different groups. And, and both of the candidates have very high unfavorable or trustworthiness, ratings in the polls. This is a very interesting thing. I mean, for Christians, I think too, it's like you want to be able to trust in them, but I think you're right in talking about you have to be pragmatic in our lives. We have to be pragmatic in a lot of different things, and this is just another case. And those voters, those people who just said, they look at that checklist and they say, okay, well, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it, but they do have this one, and this one, and compare Trump versus Hillary. It's still probably the better. I mean, we've heard that the kind of the lesser of two evils. We don't really know what we're getting with Trump in the end for sure, but I'm thinking like it's got to be better than what we would get with Clinton. Do we want Obama 3.0 or worse, especially since she seems to have, she's trying to co-opt or gain the confidence of the Sanders supporters with some success. That convention has been kind of interesting along those lines. And so lurching left. So I think, we're seeing the Democrats going even further left. And maybe that gives Trump a little bit more of an avenue, a little more divided, because he can go towards the middle, as he's already talked about. He's going to protect the LGBTQ community. Ivanka talked about really the gender gap and pay equality, things that I never thought I would ever hear in a Republican convention. But that may give him enough room to do this.
Well, I look at Trump basically as an opportunist, and I think you're right. He's not a politician. He's way more a businessman. But if you look back on his career as a businessman, it's all about opportunity, what's best for him. And I think that's the attitude he's taking into his campaign for the White House. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing for Americans, because often what's best for Trump is going to be what's best for America too. What's best for Trump is to have a good employment record, and that benefits Americans. What's best for Trump is to, fight the war on terror and have strong national borders so he can boost America's economy, stronger deals, trade deals, and so forth. And those things actually are better for Americans. And if you look at what Hillary will do, she's an opportunist as well, but she's way more to the left, and I think her opportunistic ideals are growing government, pure and simple.
Yeah, and I think with Trump, should he be elected president, even though he'd have to basically put all his business interests aside, his family would be running things, in 4 years or 8 years, whatever the time may be, he still wants to be able to return to those companies. He wants to make sure his business interests flourish. He's probably not going to be taking actions that would be harmful to that, and that it does include employment and everything else like that. Now, you mentioned earlier, too, you're talking about, the politicians aren't necessarily all bad. You get to Washington. This has been kind of my pet peeve, or one of the things that really has bothered me over the years. And when I started looking at this, going back to 1994 when the Republicans took over Congress, a lot of good people came to Congress that year. It was, very revolutionary in what had happened. And Gingrich, they kind of took all the low-hanging fruit and with the contract with America and, kind of showed through a lot of things. But I noticed over the years and subsequent elections that you had people who came in. They were really good people, very down-to-earth people. They were very idealistic, I think. They hadn't really seen what happens in D.C. They may have served in their local, in a state legislature or something locally, but they hadn't. And then they pledge, I'll be here for 6 years or whatever. But they get into the system, And I really think the system kind of corrupts them. The money coming in, all the importance that's built into that system, and they run. Was it George Nethercutt? I guess it was Washington. I mean, I think he was one that had pledged 2 or 3 terms, and when that time was up, he refused to go,
Right.
and they pretty much had to force him out over time. But I think that's what happens to people. I think the system, more than anything else, good people can be corrupted. It can be easily kind of just, I don't know, D.C. can be a cesspool, I guess.
I agree completely. And I actually have a chapter in The Devil in D.C. that deals with the perks that you get from being in Congress, from parking to, the free mailings and so forth, to a gym, to doctor's offices right there, so you don't have to take a day off from work like the rest of us peon Americans have to do if you're sick.
Great health care.
Right. Oh, not to mention that, but the benefits and the perks they get. Seriously, you can be the most idealistic person with the best principles and the best intents once you go to D.C., but within a couple years, how can you not be sucked up into that lifestyle and enjoy it? And there's nothing wrong with it, except they want to deny that they enjoy it, and they feel like they're entitled to it. And that's when it becomes a problem. When you're a politician and you think you're entitled to what the taxpayers are providing you, that's when our government has flipped.
Yeah, and one of the things I think you also were talking about too, but in terms of how unpopular Congress is as a whole. I mean, and we've seen those polls. It's pretty low, like 6% or something like that, right? This doesn't surprise me. Here's something that I've run across here in D.C. I remember there's Paul Weyrich has had this weekly meeting for a number of years, and when Paul was still alive, when I was going, Roy Blunt was a congressman, and at that time the Republicans were in the minority, and he would come and he would show up every week, and he would basically give his congressional report saying, well, this is what we did this week with the Democrats. We named 50 more post offices. And that would seem to be the common theme week after week about the lack of anything, the do-nothing Congress from his point of view. So now the Republicans take over. I haven't really seen that much of a difference. I don't know that they're doing a whole lot more than the Democrats did. I mean, they have voted on some, they stop a few things along the way, but it just seems they've gone into that same pattern of, we're not actually going to be in session that many times, and they haven't done a lot of substantive things that I think the voters had hoped that they would do.
Right. We still have Obamacare, which, we heard year after year that Republicans, once they took over the House and Senate, they were going to do away with Obamacare. There's been a lot of promises and so forth. I actually don't mind when Congress does nothing because we have enough rules and regulations, to be honest.
And I think the stock market likes the do-nothing Congress because they figure the status quo is better than what they could upset the apple cart with.
Right. But I do recall, to go forward with your point, I do recall back when Bush was president and there was a Republican House and Senate, so the Republicans had the sweep for a few months period there. And what did Bush do? He brought forward Harriet Miers as the nominee for the Supreme Court. And, that was his chance to bring forward a Supreme Court justice in the vein of Scalia, who was younger, who would have gone on now, still be on the court, and he didn't do it. So there's a lot that goes on, even when Republicans will have a full sweep. That counter what Republicans are voted into office to do.
Yeah, I mean, to me, those type of things, they have this opportunity, this golden opportunity to really put their stamp on things and really do things that they've been whining about and talking about for years. And then they go and they do something like that. Don't get me started on the Supreme Court and what the Republicans, how they've bungled that in general over the years. When they've had the chance, and we've seen the result of that. And that's another thing. I mean, if Clinton gets into office, we're talking 25, 35 years. This is not going to be good for conservatives, for Christians, and whatnot. But that also leads me to this other thing. In your book, you talk about executive orders. And I know you listed all the executive orders. Now, Obama has been heavily criticized on the executive orders, but has his issuance of executive orders been all that out of ordinary compared to the recent presidents?
Right. Well, every president has issued executive orders, even Reagan, But what the difference is with Obama's executive orders, He hasn't issued as many as past presidents, but his has gone far beyond the scope of what past presidents have attempted to do with their executive orders. You know, Obama's tried to ramrod through climate change agenda. Because Congress wouldn't pass it. He's tried to push through gun control. He's done a host of other things with his executive orders that other presidents haven't, because they realize that those rightly belong in the hands of Congress. But Obama, like many call him King Obama, he seems to circumvent Congress quite a bit more with his executive orders than past presidents have done.
And you say, to abolish all executive orders, right?
I don't like them. I don't like them at all. They're not in the Constitution. They're not constitutional. Why do we have them? You know, we have a Congress to create laws, and we have a Senate to advise and consent on treaties, and we have the White House, which is supposed to be, just the third tier of power. But now with executive orders, you're handing over the legislature to the White House, and I don't like them at all.
All right. One more thing here that we'll talk about and that's media bias. Of course, something that's near and dear to my heart. You talk about being your own watchdog. I think that's a great idea. Explain that a little bit.
You have to. You can't be an American now and just look at the headlines and flip on, your local news. I don't care even if it's Fox News, whatever you watch. You need to get your news from a variety of sources, because there's so much media bias out there. You're going to miss what the actual issue is about. And to go with that, I think everybody should at least read the Constitution once, so you're able to take the premise of what our government was built upon and compare it to where we are now, and that will help you make your own decision about what's going on that's right versus what's going on that's wrong.
Right, and I've told people over the years that actually I think that you should be reading things from all spectrums so you can decide and discern for yourself. You don't have to listen to the media, once again, whether or not it's the Fox News or MSNBC, and let them kind of dictate and tell you what they think and what you should believe. I think you need to go out there and really decide these things for yourself. In a lot of ways, the internet has kind of freed that up, and if you have all kinds of opinions out there. Of course, it's probably created, a million self-proclaimed media critics along the way. Not all great, but it's been interesting. And even with the decline of newspapers, the media bias, the liberal media, that's not going to go away.
No, it's not. And our republic, to have a lasting republic, needs an informed citizenry. We need people to read from a variety of sources, to be informed on the historical basis of this country, to realize by looking at that and comparing it to modern day society how far we've strayed. And then once you have that information, you're equipped to fight and do something about it.
Well, Cheryl, this has been great. I really appreciate that. This book is great. I'm going to hold it up again.
Thank you.
You've got to read this. This is a great part. I was thinking too about when I was going through the book. I thought, boy, I don't remember the last time I read a book, what I will say for the mainstream audience, that had so much quoted so much scripture and some things like that, and weaved all that in there. And I think that really showed your passion and your desire and what you want to do. The question really will be will people listen and follow this advice, because they really need to do it?
I hope so. I really do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. And how can people follow you, contact you, get your book?
Sure. CherylChumley.blogspot.com is where I'm at now. And you can get my book on Amazon, WND Books, or Barnes & Noble.
All right. Well, terrific. And that'll be it for this special edition of the Bias Buzz. Join us next week when we return for our regular edition. Thank you. Bullseye.